Welcome, welcome. I love that each of you are here tonight. This is our February last lecture series, but it's not February because of our snowstorm. But what better day to have it than when golf season is ready, right, Debbie? Don't you think? And somebody said, Hillary said, that she thought Jordan Spieth was going to be here tonight. So you have to make up for that because he's now a Dallas hero, right? So she's going to tell us why he's such a great player. No, but we really are excited about you being here. I think many of you are long-term friends and supporters of BrainHealth. And I hope each of you will leave here tonight knowing that the center here is uniquely focused really around the globe on finding markers of brain health. How do we know when your brain is getting better? Most every institute around the world is looking at what's wrong with your brain as you age. You know, why do we lose synapses, and why do we lose tissue and brain blood flow? But no one's focused on what happens when your brain gets better. And we're also looking at some of the most innovative ways to advance that, whether you're health, injury, and disease. Just this past week, I was just telling Joel and Linda, I've had almost 3 17-hour days in a row. It's been pretty exhausting, but very exciting. I was in Fort Leavenworth with the Department of Defense, had a big symposium on cognitive dominance. Cognitive dominance. What do you think about the word cognitive dominance? So it was a small group of individuals looking at what is it about our military that is not keeping an edge. They said we have the best weapons, the most sophisticated armor, everything, but the thing that to stay ahead of the game, we've got to start building cognitive dominance. Because our enemy now is very adaptive, agile, they quickly change. And we need to put the brain in the equation for resilience and regeneration. And I want to tell you that I felt so proud to be there because that's what we've been doing for the last 15, 20 years. To be there, to think about that we're now thinking, and one of the words they said is that the brain starts our health and ends with our health. Without brain health, the thing I say, you don't have health. And it was a cardiologist that stood up and said, our health begins and ends with the brain. Because when you don't have your brain health, you don't have anything. So he said, I hate to say this as a cardiologist because I thought it was your heart. Now I know it's your brain to be there. So the next day I was with generals, wives, Marines in D.C. And they too were, we've got to stop injuring the brain and then try to figure out ways to repair it. We've got to figure out ways to make them healthier before anything happens. And I said, thank you, because that's exactly, so we got to share, and they were asking questions for about 2 hours, question answer, how can we get you? And of course, when we finished, they all wanted to come and go through the training, and which is exciting for us, because you see this, as you ask about how can you participate, we have over 75 research studies here, but if you don't qualify for a research study, we can't help you. But we're going to break ground in October on our Brain Performance Institute, right next door, where we will be able to take all of the latest discoveries and offer them to people. And who knows, maybe Dr. Cruz can help our golf game, and we'll figure out a way to have this virtual system that, again, will be globally known for solutions for brain health. So we're honored to be here. I would like to thank the Container Store, Kent Tyndall, Melissa, for this incredible series that each of you are here, and our shopping day that they just helped support us. If you're Container Store, is anybody here from the Container Store? Raise your hand. I know if I said, is anybody here that shops at the Container Store, everybody would raise their hand. I'd love for anybody here, our staff that's welcomed you. We're just so glad that you're in our home, and I know you really didn't come here to hear me talk, so I'm going to turn it over to our incredible vice chair of our board, Joel Roebuck. Joel, how are your yips these days?
I've got the yips.
I've got the yips. I said, oh, who else here told me they said yips is a cuss word if you're a golfer? I don't know. Is that true, Debbie? Joel?
Good evening and welcome to this lecture. Sandy has given you some of the introduction about the container store and why we're here, but it is a great opportunity and we're honored to have Dr. Debbie Cruz here as our speaker tonight after we rescheduled from the inclement weather in February. As you know, the mission of the Center for Brain Health is to understand, protect, and heal our brains. And that's for all ages and stages of our lives. And it's very appropriate that we're here tonight talking about the brain science behind golf, why some experience the yips. It's very timely because a young man, 21 years old, from Dallas, Texas, just won the Masters this last weekend. Incredible story, very humble young man who has really worked and earned what he has achieved so far. And the sky's the limit, in my opinion, for Jordan. But it's also interesting to note that he did have the yips on Saturday. He had like a 12-inch putt to make a par, and he actually missed it. Well, I was visiting with Patty Huffines, who's here tonight, about that, and Patty was talking about how creative Sandy wants us to think. She always wants us to think creatively. And so Patty was telling me she solved that problem because any putt within 6 feet is a gimme, which means it's automatically good and you don't have to putt it. So that was a very creative solution by Patty. My guess is the yips also spill over into other parts of our lives. Lynn and I are golfers, and I know I have the yips. Linda does not, but I know that I also get yips in other activities of my life. But let me introduce Dr. Debbie Cruz. Debbie is a sports psychology consultant for Arizona State University and also the women's golf team, and is a faculty teaching associate in exercise and wellness. She is also a master teaching professional with the Ladies Professional Golf Association, the LPGA. She has been conducting research related to golf, considering the brain and heart characteristics for optimal performance for over 30 years. She has done so much research that an actual putter was created based on the research that she had done over the years. She received her BS degree from the University of Wisconsin and her MS and PhD degrees from Arizona State University. Debbie is here tonight to help us understand our brain performance related to golf, yips, and also to help us heal this pervasive problem. So would you please welcome Dr. Debbie Cruz.
Good evening. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Joel for the introduction and Dr. Chapman and the Container Store for bringing me here. It's so innovating to see this center and everything that you're doing with the brain. I wish I was young again and I could come back here and do some of the research. And the Performance Institute sounds phenomenal, and I'm so glad there's going to be athletes in it. Our lab was probably, and the mentor that I worked with for my PhD was probably the first person to start kind of looking at psychophysiology in sport. And I was very fortunate to be able to work with him at Arizona State University. And he didn't like golf because it took too much time and took us away from our work and our studies. But we studied the brain in several sports. He actually started in gun shooting, and then we took it to archery when we were at Arizona State University. He was at Penn State first. And then I took it to golf, and so over the years we've learned a lot. Performance is performance. And so when we look at some of these patterns that we're observing, it's understandable that it applies to many different things that we do, because it's all about performance and getting into a nice state. Let's see, I think I just do that. There we go. Okay, so this picture right here from long ago is probably what instigated a lot of the interest in the Yips. And what I want to do first today is talk a little bit about the brain and what we've kind of learned regarding those states in the brain that exist when people perform well, and then when they perform not so well. And then we've also been able to do some training to train the states. So the second area that I'll cover is the Yips. It's gotten a little more popularity lately. It is a bad word in golf, but at least people sometimes now will talk about it, especially if they want to get any better. In the Phoenix Open this year in January, Tiger Woods ended up with a little bit of chipping yips. And he did perform in the Masters and quite well for not having played a tournament for a while, and as I understand, did not yip. So it's just a fascinating condition. And I've been working with Mayo Clinic on the Yips for a number of years, and so we know some things. There's lots more for us to find out, but we'll keep pursuing our study. And then recommendations, how we can help people. Okay, so let's talk about the brain in golf. If you ask people who play the game, most of them will say at least probably 90% of it's mental, so that means a lot of it's going on up here. Once you learn the swing hopefully kind of takes care of itself and is being performed more automatically. So then the issue is, well, what are you doing with your brain, your consciousness when you perform? Can I ask, how many of you play golf? Oh, good. So you're probably well aware of the mental side of it. I always figure it's a very mental game, or it makes us very mental, one of the two. So the other piece is we study a lot with putting. Well, part of the reason we study putting is because those people stand so still. So when they stand still, we can actually get brain and heart measures off of them that are good measures. But it is 40% or more of the game. So putting is a very big part of it. The interesting thing about putting, the stroke is about this big. So there's not much mechanical to the stroke. You know, you don't need to spend a whole bunch of this time working out the stroke. So the interesting thing is, where's the rest of your capacity up here going if it's not going to creating the mechanics? So and the hole's right there, so the outcome is very close. So that's what makes it probably a pretty important part of the game. The tour players will pretty much tell you putting is all of the game. When you're younger and you're new at the game, swinging that big club and contacting the ball and sending it becomes a little more challenging. But for the tour players, it comes down to putting. So what we know, conscious and left-sidedness usually takes place behind the ball. And what I mean by that is there's lots of planning that we do to get ready. We look out there where we're going, what we want to do. The brain, of course, is making decisions back there, a little bit of aiming, a little bit of imagery. All of these things are going on. And we would like to do most of that behind the ball, and then that would be more of our left-sided processing, our logical analytical type processing. It's very sequential. Those things are very important to get done, the preparation. Most of the better players do start from behind the ball, some beside the ball, but that's okay. Somewhere you start the process. Then the subconscious and balanced or right-sided activities tend to take place more over the ball. So as you walk up and you get ready for your performance, your motion, the left side is less involved. You're just kind of putting the pieces of the puzzle together. You set yourself, get ready, look out at your target, get everything in place. So all those left-sided activities hopefully get done, and that's a very important part. And then what happens is we get this nice synchrony in the brain. Or it might be a little more right-sided. Our creative, imaginative, intuitive, autonomic, automatic performance is going to come more from that side. So we've seen this pattern, we've seen it across the sports. Very important that the left side quiets. There's a few brain training tools out there right now, and primarily what they're doing is helping these golfers quiet the left side of their brain. Okay, in terms of heart rate, we look at that relative to attention, focus of attention, and we see in the last 3 seconds before you start the motion, there's about a 6 beat per minute drop in heart rate. It doesn't matter if your heart rate is 60 or 160 in terms of the tonic heart rate. The phasic response will be this little drop in heart rate relative to focus of attention. If it's not there, you're probably not performing as well because your focus is going to be in the wrong place. So we've used those to kind of figure out what patterns exist that are best for performance. Okay, I want to separate two components of the game out, one being learning and the other one being performance. A lot of us, perhaps you're working on something, you go out to the range, you go out to the putting green and practice. You're working on learning the motor skill, motor learning components. But the other part is motor control, it's motor performance, and that's what happens when you go on the golf course. They are different states of mind, and that's important. One of the reasons it's important for Yips is when you're learning, you have a state of mind where you're taking in information, trying things out, getting feedback, making changes, adjustments. There's not much in terms of consequences. When we go out to the course and all of a sudden it's a little more important and there's a score involved and there's expectations and those other things, we want to be in our performance state of mind. Okay, and then so Yips often does not happen in practice. It doesn't happen on the practice putting green for a lot of people. It doesn't happen even in regular play sometimes. For some players it'll only happen in tournaments. So separating these two out and understanding there's a difference is important. It's important for the players as well because their state of mind might be in a little bit different place. So consciousness is what I've been studying a lot of in terms of looking at brain patterns because we're using EEG and we're just looking at the surface of the brain. And where they are at a certain point of time is going to pretty much dictate which motor program comes out. So I've spent probably 25 at least years looking at 1 second of data that occurs right before the people start the motion back, but it is the one that is predictive of performance. 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4, 5, 6 seconds, people are doing different things with their brain. It's kind of like the swing, you know, right around impact people do very much the same thing, but on the other sides of it, they do different things. Same things going on in the brain. But we can help them get to that 1 second state of mind that's going to be predictive of better performance. Okay, so this one kind of explains the role of attention. It's an old theory or hypothesis by Kahneman, and it relates very well to capacity space in the brain. However much that is, we know it's a lot, but however much is up there, if you can understand how it works when you go from learning and performance, it really helps the performer. So when you learn, right over here, you're going to be spending a little bit of time here on mechanics. Some of you, maybe if you just started playing, it's a lot for you to be able to get over there, set everything up, get everything in place. It takes a lot of thinking power to do that. That is a routine really for beginners. And so a lot of their focus of attention is on the components of setup and swing. When you get to become skilled, and skill being, you know, I mean, I'm talking 70s, 80s, maybe even into the 90s shooter, you are not going to be spending very much of your time on mechanics because it's automatic and it's being performed more at the subconscious level. So if that's the case, what becomes critical for these players, probably Jordan Spieth as well, is where they are in their consciousness while they're performing. And that's something that we want to make sure they know in terms of their awareness. What we find in our research is that there's primarily 2 places the best players are right before they take the club back. One of them is going to be focused on target, or the other one is on feel, or a combination of the two. But those are pretty much the only two areas that our players focus on when they perform very well. So there's no mechanics really in there, at least for the skilled players. So we have this cortical communication going on, and at rest the brain's pretty much in an idling state. It's in an inhibitory state. And then once we want to start a motion, what happens is we release that inhibition in various areas so that we're able to perform. For an elite golfer, they don't use nearly as many areas of the brain as a novice who doesn't know which areas of the brain to use and which not to use. And then once they become skilled, if they're using too many areas of the brain, they're going to be in trouble, or the wrong areas of the brain. So the cells are all firing, they're all doing their job, they're talking with each other, and pretty much at the end of that routine for that last second, the communication is done, everything's completed, and so now it's time to go ahead and perform. And if they get in this ideal state for them, they're probably going to perform very well, and the motor program will run quite well. This probably changes a little bit for Yips, but let's look at what it appears to be for good performers. So we typically hook up our players. This is one study that we did that has 267 measures on this poor tour player here. And we had 6 computers set up, and we were measuring everything from EEG to heart rate to balance to motion to ball activity. I think that maybe covers all of them. But by doing that, we've been able to kind of define which of the measures are really the ones that are predictors of performance. So we create brain maps. Once again, this is that last second before people perform well, and let me show you the differences. This is the top pictures right up here are our tour player, and the ones on the bottom are our novice. If we look at the is it a little surprising they're red? You already know, so if you probably all know brain maps, I usually have to explain them, but red is high activity, blue is low, that's why everybody's laughing. The nose is here, back of the head, right and left. So we're looking here at theta, alpha, beta, and gamma, different frequencies, and I don't know if you can see the dots. We're looking usually at 12 to 14 different areas in the brain when we're looking at our performers. Okay, so this is the make of the tour player. If you notice, it's relatively quiet. There's a pattern there. It's a little bit stronger back there in the occipital, so he's still processing. It's a little red there. He's still probably visually processing a little bit. Maybe not quite done there, but it's a good place to be. These are all very synchronized, theta, alpha, beta, beta 2. This is his miss. So when he gets missed, that left-sidedness, it often pops out in alpha, but he's probably thinking a little bit too much at that point in time, but the problem more so is that it's on the left side of the brain. Okay, this is our novice. Even though this person has never played golf, when he makes a putt, it's a pretty good synchrony in the brain. So if we can help that player get to a synchronous state, he's got a better chance of performing. And this obviously is not quite so synchronous, and that would be his miss. I'll just show you a few so you get an idea of the pattern that's here. We have the good fortune to test Alan Alda from MASH years back. He has this show, Scientific America Frontier. So I was attempting to change his state of mind and then look and see what happens with performance. The man has never played a round of golf, despite hitting shots in the show. He's never played golf, but other than putt-putt with his grandkids is what he would say. And so this was his, I'm sorry. We'll go back. This is his baseline putting. And so he has a variety of activity in different areas of his brain. I believe that was probably 20 putts that he did. And then we put him on the bike. I do that often to get activation levels up and then see what they do with it relative to performance. And so he got off the bike, and this is where he made the most putts. And what you can see is that the synchrony in the brain, the patterns become much more similar. And he made, I think he made 6 putts there, and I can't remember exactly how many he made there, but probably closer to 10 putts. And the interesting piece also is his comment was that he it felt when he got off the bike just like his acting state. So he got in his acting state, his state of brain that he's very familiar with, and he comes in and he performs very well in the lab. Okay, so the next one is going to be a group data of some Swedish European tour players that came over, and we collected data on how many of you know that good feel you have when the ball's going in the hole before you putt it? Okay, I know there's more of you. Sometimes you know ahead of time it's going in, and I mean you could close your eyes and turn the putter backwards, it'd still go in because you're in this good state of mind. Well, I was interested in capturing that state of mind, so we had these people putting the 40 putts, and then afterwards, after the putt, they were supposed to tell us if they knew it was going in beforehand. We couldn't have them tell us before because then they would take them out of their good state of mind. So what happened is we separated all the putts into those that they knew it was going in ahead of time versus those that they didn't know were going in. The interesting thing is these were 13-foot putts, and all of these putts went into the hole. Okay, but the difference you're going to see is that when they didn't know it ahead of time, the brain is still pretty active and processing. Okay, when they knew it ahead of time, everything gets very quiet and done. We have these beautiful patterns in the brain. Okay, and then the last one, we do some things with full swing as well. This is a LPGA tour player we had in testing, and she was hitting 8-iron shots to a target out on the range, and these were her 8-iron shots that were all very good. She was highly skilled. And then we asked her, there was a little circle in the middle of this big target. It was probably this big in diameter. We said, put the ball in that little circle. And so she says, okay. So she stands back and gets ready, goes through her whole routine. You could see the level of focus change. She walks up and she nails it. She puts the ball in that little tiny hole. This was her brain 1 second before she started that motion. Everything got done, and I don't want to emphasize quiet too much because they're not under high pressure here. So it's not like they're going to have perhaps high levels of activation in the brain, but everything got done, and if anything, she's a little more right-sided, but she's so consistent with the pattern. Well, if you look at all the frequencies and the locations in the brain, so it keeps telling us kind of the same story about helping players to be a little more synchronous, helping them get done and defining those patterns. Okay, so now that we've talked about great performance in golf and putting and full swing, what we probably want to switch to a little bit is the yips. The yips, most of you know probably are an uncontrollable spasm or jerk motion that happens usually right before impact, not always, but most of the time it's in about a 250 millisecond window right before the putter strikes the ball. So they've already started the motion. It can be a freezing motion as well. It can occur in putting. It can occur, it's actually getting a lot more prevalent in chipping, and it can be in full swing. It can also be a freezing. I've had players that can't get started. They get up here, they can't get started. They get here, they can't keep going, whatever it happens to be. But it's quite debilitating in terms of performance. It was named Yips by a Scottish golf pro in the early 1900s. What's kind of interesting is a German neurologist coined the term for dystonia in 1911. It was about the same time, and we'll get to dystonia in a minute. So McDaniel did probably the first study on it, involuntary motor disturbance affecting golfers. There's a list of researchers after that who have done studies on it, and there's others, of course. What's really been fascinating is some of the things we've been able to tease out with the research. Anxiety, lots of times people think you're just nervous and you can't control your hands and your motion. Anxiety is not the cause of yips. It exacerbates the condition. It makes it bigger. But the interesting thing is if we can take all the anxiety away, it's not necessarily the yips going to go away. Okay, so we've done a couple beta blocker studies with it, and that's kind of what we've seen. Because anxiety makes it bigger, it tends to make them miss the hole, or it tends to make them miss the green. The anxiety to me is kind of the middleman. Here's you, here's the hole, and all the anxiety makes everything worse. If we could just take the middleman out, the anxiety and fear about it, the yip itself is not that bad sometimes. Sometimes it is. Okay, so just so we understand the role of anxiety a little bit. One of the main focus that we've done with Mayo Clinic, I've been working with them since 2002. We did a study, started at Rochester Mayo, and then 3 more studies at Scottsdale Mayo Clinic, and that's defining categories of yips. Most people think it's just one group of performers. It's in so many other areas of sport as well. You'll know it from baseball, from throwing. It's dartitis in darts. It's cueitis in snooker. It's target panic in archery. It's flinching in gun shooting. But it's whatever, it's those involuntary emotions that disturb their performance. And there isn't one type of yip, there's categories. Okay, so there's a neurologic, we often put at one end of the continuum, neurological yips, which would be more categorized as a focal dystonia or a specific movement disorder. Writer's cramp might be a term you're familiar with, so it would be golfer's cramp in this case, the lay person's term. And we would like to define who those people are because we would treat them differently. And then at the other end, the psychological end, what I've found is that there's conditional yips. It only happens on my left to right putts, downhill. It only happens on 3 and 4 foot putts. It only happens, with the tournament championship on the line. But if I just play with my friends, I'm fine. It can be intermittent. It comes and goes. Some people I've had come with yips, and then they make one change, and then it's gone for a while, and then a few years later, a few months later, they're back because it's back, and so it can be intermittent, and it can be both. Added to this is severity of yips. Okay, so with some of them, it can be pretty debilitating, and some it's less debilitating. Okay, let me just give you an example. I'm not sure you can see this real well. Oh, so sorry. There it is. Okay, so this is one of our studies with Mayo. We have the player hooked up, and you'll see on the right hand there is what's called a cyber glove. We're measuring there's 17 different sensors looking at everything in the hand and the wrist of that person. And I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it. Oh, sorry, running my machine here. Hit the play button. If you watch his right hand, there we go. You'll kind of see more of a hitting. Do you see it would ideally be a smooth motion back and forward, and the ball will move forward. But if you look at his right hand there, it's going to be more of a hitting action, and it's a jerk. It's not real prevalent from this camera angle, but that's typically what we're looking at. I think he's probably got one more going in there. In this study, there's the jerk spasm again, and we also have EMG looking at muscle activity. Okay. In terms of brain patterns, we've done some research looking at what's going on in the brain of Yips. This happened to be an individual that came to do some testing with me. He actually worked for Ping, and all of his peers were around, and they were interested in seeing the research on the brain. It happened to be at the Ping golf course, and I didn't know the gentleman had the Yips. I felt kind of bad for him because he's performing in front of everybody, and out comes this Yip. And what happened was that I had moved the equipment too close to him, so he was standing in a different position than he usually putts in, and that's very important for Yips. And it was not good for this gentleman, and so he starts yipping. So I collected the data, and you'll see the left-sidedness again, especially in alpha right there, that goes on often, I believe, with the Yips. This same gentleman then had done biofeedback training for it, went off by himself, did his own meditation or whatever he was doing over here, got himself out of that state of mind, came back, and he put these putts. And he was much more in a synchronous place, and he was able to perform. So we suspect in the brain it can go quite a bit left-sidedness. It can also become very frontal. when the executive function kicks in and starts trying to control the motion and the mechanics again, which is not a good thing. It is not the direction to go if someone has the yips. Okay, so let's talk through a little bit about what we've learned from the yips. It's the numbers from the research across studies are probably ranging 28 to 53% of golfers have yips, and those are only the ones that will tell you they have yips. Okay, there's a lot more of them that are in denial and not willing to say anything. But I believe the prevalence is going up quite a bit because people want help. And so I see it, you see the age range is 31 to 56. It's usually older individuals. It's usually players who have played a longer period of time, 20.9 to 31 years were in the studies. That's not always the case. The youngest in one of the studies was a 10-year-old with yips. I've worked with as young as 16 years old. Usually it happens in their best skill. So if putting was something they were very good at, that's where we tend to see it. If it was chipping, it might show up in chipping instead. Their mean handicap is low. They're skilled performers. The average increase in strokes was 4.9 per almost 5 strokes around. They're losing to yips, and that's probably modest as well. So we're really interested in helping to figure out who has the yips and how we're getting them. As you can see, this pattern here is suggesting to us that motor program becomes dysfunctional. The motor program telling those muscles what to do, whether it's the sensory input going into those muscles, it's sensory input prior to the motor programming that's disrupting the motor programming and causing the problem, is probably what's building over this history of performance. Okay, so there's about 3 different ways that we start studying the yips. This is the first set of data that I'll talk about, and it's from a SAM putting lab. Have any of you been on a SAM putting lab? Okay, a few. 28 different measures on your putting. That's a lot of information about your putting. So you're just putting balls, and it can give you 28 different results. Okay, but it's very good for helping to understand what's happening to the club. So there's a couple of researchers and a group of people who study it this way. And what they have come up with is that looking at the club, rotation is the primary problem that occurs. Their explanation of it is that they think that the yippers are resisting rotation, which would maybe suggest over-inhibition. And so there's a natural release that will occur with the motion, and the release is being inhibited. And they do a lot of work with practice strokes because it never occurs in a practice stroke. If you take the ball out, it never happens. So it's the anticipation of the hit that I don't want to say causes too carefully, but is involved with the yip itself. Okay. We did our first study with Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale looking at the EMG activity. So instead of looking at the club, we're interested in going inside and looking at what's happening in the muscles of the arms and the hands, mostly the arms, because we're interested in what's causing that flinch or that jerking motion. The first one was in a lab, and it was a small 3, 6, and 8 foot putt. We brought 10 yips affected in and 10 controls in. We found out that 5 of the 10 yips had co-contraction. So the agonist, antagonist, and the arms were firing at the same time. We thought well, it's not great, but what it is it could be a marker. Co-contraction is a marker that's used for focal dystonia. So we thought maybe we can identify our yips affected by using co-contraction. None of the controls had the co-contraction. So it was a small group. It was inside of a lab. So we extended the study, ASU once again, in Mayo Clinic. This time we went outside. This is our crew of Dr. Adler from Mayo and John Cavanis, and then Marco and Canabra from bioengineering, excuse me, at ASU. And we took it out to a more real setting, thinking we're going to be able to elicit more yips. The objective was to look at not only the EMGs, but this time we put that cyber glove on so we could look and see what's happening with emotion. A lot of the instructors think it's in the fingers. There's a problem in the fingers. So we had 17 different sensors looking at the fingers, and then we had the wrist motion being captured as well. So we had 25 golfers that told us they had the Yips, and 25 golfers that were age, gender, and skill matched to them. We, thank heavens, videotaped these golfers as they were performing for us. And this time we set them up in the typical Yip situations, left to rights, rights to left, shorter putts, and had them go through all these. We analyzed the straight putts in terms of the results I'm telling you right now, because we had more of those. So what are the options in terms of what the wrist or hand could be doing? We could have abduction, flexion, extension, or rotation. As I mentioned from the Puckett Lab, the club is telling us that it's mostly rotation. So we went through you see the sensors, and the cyber glove right here is placed on the individuals. It's placed on their affected hand, which for all right-handed golfers, it would be the right hand. Okay, what did we have in terms of a group? Well, what's fascinating is the ones that told us they had the Yips didn't all have the Yips, and some of the ones that didn't think they had the Yips had the Yips. So we realized we can't go on self-report anymore, and it's not a subjective analysis. So what we went to, thank heavens, was the videos. And when we divided the group, instead based on videos, we had 17 Yips and 33 without the Yips. And you can see some of the age. They were older. Of course, they had a little higher handicap. More of them were males. Okay, and then we looked at the co-contraction. Remember, that was our marker we're trying to find. And what we found when we separated them correctly was that 41% of them had co-contraction, although some of our non-Yips, 18% also had co-contraction. And in our first study, it was 50% that had co-contraction. So we're a little bit confused here about co-contraction as to whether it could be a marker. Then we looked at what is the motion of the hands. So we've got the EMG results, now we're looking at the hands. And we see that the one that's significant is rotation, the same thing the club was telling us. There are some people who have flexion extension Yips, but not very many of them. Okay, so our conclusion from this study was really the co-contraction is probably a characteristic, but we can't use it as a marker in and of itself. It's not diagnostic, so we're going to have to combine it with some other measures. Rotation might be one of them in terms of our visual inspection of it, and we're continuing to do the research. Part of the reason this is important to define the neurologic is because one of the treatments that is used actually with focal dystonia is Botox, because it weakens the muscles. And I mean, there's a lot of athletes out there who quit their careers because they can't throw a ball anymore, they can't putt a ball anymore, and they've spent their whole life doing it. So if there's a way we can help them, not that we're anxious to go to medications, but if there's a way we can help them and it's neurologically based, we want to be able to do that, but we want to make sure we're defining that group very, very specifically and correctly. So this was our third study. We just finished collecting the data on a few weeks ago. We're analyzing the data, but we combined all three measures this time. So we have the Puckett Lab looking at the club, we have the EMG on the arms, and we have another wrist rotation measurement that we're looking at. We have been looking at treatments a little bit in this study. One of the treatments for Yips often is looking at the target instead of looking at the ball, because the ball tends to cause a lot of problems in Yip. So we have players doing their baseline, looking at the target. One suggestion out there is they're just aligned incorrectly, so if we fix their line and get them lined straight up, they won't Yip. So we tested that one in this study, and we also did beta blockers. This is the second study we've used propranolol to test with. We had them putt with both hands and right hand only, which thank heavens we had them putt right hand only, because the Yip is usually quite pronounced with right hand only compared to both on there, which was very interesting to us. We're analyzing the data now. If my guesstimate, although I don't have the data to support it, is the beta blockers didn't make any difference, which we're kind of pleased about. It'll reduce the anxiety. Even if it's psychological yips, it doesn't seem to be helping the condition. Alignment probably made it worse rather than better, at least in terms of performance as well. Looking at the target can be helpful for some. We've also done a condition in one of the other studies with eyes closed, which probably helps some yips-affected golfers, but I'll go through treatments in a minute. So we're attempting to not only define categories of yips, but also to test some of these treatments. Okay, so the last, probably most important part here is going to be recommendations. What can we do for these people? I want to address the arousal anxiety one again, because it's important for the players especially to understand that it's not the cause of their problem. But if they get so concerned about it before they ever get up to the ball, they're just making it bigger and worse. Okay, so when I've watched people in the lab putt 75 putts, of which most of them dropped in the hole, and they yipped every one of them, it's not necessarily the yip that is so poor in terms of performance, it's the fear of it, it's the anxiety about it that makes it so big, and then they start missing the hole. So most performers, golfers, throwers, etc., think, if I yip, I'm going to miss. But that is not true. We've seen it in the lab so many times from so many different people. It doesn't mean they're going to miss it. In fact, some of them, if they didn't yip, they wouldn't have gotten it in the hole, okay? Because it brought it right back into where it was supposed to be. So if the players can understand that if we can reduce the anxiety, fear of it, they still can perform. My goal always is to get these players to keep playing and help them understand you can get the ball in the hole, regardless, or on the green or out into the fairway, whichever one. So what we use, we'll talk about breathing is a great technique to help with some of the arousal anxiety. You know, if beta blockers isn't doing it, reducing just the anxiety isn't going to do it either. So we want to have other treatments as well. They have a choice before they set up to every putt or shot. About 50% I would say no, it's coming before they step up, and 50% maybe don't know it's coming. When we did our Rochester study, we had 16 people flying from all over the world to participate in this study. 50% could tell you the exact putt that started their yips, and 50% nope, it was gradual over time. Okay, so it's very interesting condition. If they can look at the putt by choice as a challenge instead of a threat, they're in an approach mindset instead of an avoid mindset. If there's importance on it, it's good stress, it's not distress. It can be used to help them focus their attention. They can actually get better with that increased activation and focus, not necessarily worse. And they look forward to doing it instead of wanting to fight or flight and get out of here. They have a chance. So they want to set themselves up initially to be able to step up and perform the motion. Okay, what is their focus of attention? One thing we have control over, actually sometimes we don't think we do, I think, is where you focus your attention, what you allow in here to focus on and what you don't. And we're talking consciousness, which is what I was measuring with those EEGs. So once again, if we can keep them on target and feel cues or thoughts, target and feel, they're just feeling for what's going to happen in the swing. If we can keep them on any right-sided cues, such as timing, rhythm, balance, if we have those in there for them, anything like that, it's going to be helpful for performance. The worst they can do is go to mechanics, over-focus on self and what are these people are going to think of me when I yip this ball, or whatever, all the things that can go wrong. They're setting themselves up for worse performance. Okay, what they do in their routines. Routines are important because it's where all the pieces of the puzzle come together for these players. What they do behind, as I already mentioned, is the left-sided activities. Then they walk up, put the pieces in place, and then that last second is very important for performance. So those are just some ideas. You know, behind the line, we want to be very clear about their decision, their intention, their focus of attention. We want to start them breathing. Many players don't breathe. They're going to imagine it and make sure they have some confidence in their ability to do something. It doesn't have to be put the ball in the hole. Just, I can breathe and I can finish my motion. Over the ball, they're going to do the things they know to do in their routine to get themselves going. Routine is important. In Yips, what are some of the things these players can do? I want to go through kind of the physical side and the psychological. The first most important thing to do is change position. Okay, everything in the brain and motor program is tied to the starting position. If they simply move their hands from here to here, it's different in the brain. It's different sensory input once again. So the first thing we always do is change position. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the hands. Sometimes I've come in and we just change their foot position. We change their feet, and lo and behold, their hands behave beautifully. Okay, so because of the sensory input change, we have a chance now of performing. It's going to be an alteration, a slight alteration in that motor program. Of course, we take all the pressure out of the hand that's the culprit, and they can put right or left-handed and figure out which is the culprit. But usually for right-handed player, it's the right, left-hand player. It's the dominant one because it wants to control. They want it in the hole so bad, they're going to figure out how to get it there. So we reduce all the pressure in the dominant hand, pretty much take it out of there. Then breathing will defuel it, is how I would say it. So if the last thing they do before they start the motion is let all their air out, when you have no air, you can't have tension. When you have no tension, the yip, even if it comes, is going to be softer. As soon as you add tension to it, it's going to make it bigger. Okay, so we want to defuel the yip. An interesting one is separating the hands so they don't touch. It changes from a unimanual task to a bimanual task. It's very different in the brain. It works great for chipping because we don't have as many options for chipping. Another one that we use, it's not up there, is you have them squeeze the club as hard as they can for as long as they can and wear out the muscles, and then you go ahead and perform the motion. And it works. I mean, they might yip, but it won't be quite as bad. Hold the finish is the critical one. It works for cutting, chipping, pitching, full swing yips. What we want to do is give the consciousness something to do, because the consciousness will bail. It's going to go somewhere else. I haven't figured out where it goes. I've been trying to, but it leaves. And it's smart. We don't want to experience feeling the yip one more time, so it goes somewhere else. And you can see it very easily in their motion. So if they have, we really want to give their consciousness something to do. It has to have something to do, but not mechanics. We don't want to go in and start having them try to fix the mechanics. It'll make it much worse. So what we want to do is put their focus of attention past the yip in time and have them hold their finish. And that'll keep their consciousness back in it. Okay, the top one on psychological is a hard one, I know, for yips people to handle. As long as they know they can yip it into the hole or onto the green or into the fairway, it can still get there. They can somehow make it okay to yip. Okay, it's the fear of it that's going to make it far worse. The routine, focusing past the yip we talked about. We distract them. You can have them counting. You can have them counting backwards. You just keep this busy, especially the left side, because that's usually the interference side. We just keep them busy so that the motion can take care of itself. And that's very good for psychological yips. When I work with players, I send them away. I want to have 5 to 7 different options, not one. Most yips people are giving the one thing that's going to fix it, and that's the oneness is probably what helped them get the yips, because they think I got to do this one perfect stroke exactly the same every time. And it scares me how we train our youth today in terms of sport, because we're having them grind this one perfect motion, and they're going to get yippy. That's my opinion. You know, they're going to get yippy pretty soon because they think they have to be so perfect to get it in. And the reality is that's not true at all. You know, it can go in lots of different ways. So we want to have multiple options, and we want to stay one step ahead of it. So, you know, I have players who they'll change their hands 4 different times in a round. Whatever feels good on that putt, that's how you hold it and roll the ball in the hole. They change lots of things, and that way they've set themselves up to at least have a chance of creating a motion that works for them. Okay, this is one of the most common ones, but pretty soon it's going to be rolled out of golf anchoring. Thanks to Sam Sneed, we did some of these alterations. But lastly, I want to show you a couple of changes. This was our Rochester study. We had a couple players in that I was able to get the EEGs on. They're Yippers. This one, quite left-sided, as you can see, quite disruptive. And then when we got him over, and all he did was putt left-handed instead of right-handed, so he turned around. That one usually works for a ton of people, but it's not great. Those patterns over there aren't great, but at least they're not so left-sided. We're getting a little more right-sided here, and they're coming into sync with each other. This was another one. There's the left-sidedness again that comes in his baseline putting. All he did was put left hand low. He changed his hands around on the putter. And look at the difference in terms of his brain patterns, and his performance improved tremendously. So I think that's in terms of information what I'd like to share with you, and then I'd love to have time for questions.
Okay, we'll take some questions here in the auditorium. If you want to raise your hand, I'll come to you. Anyone? Come on, don't be shy.
Are the shanks very similar to the yips?
Very good question. I'm glad you asked. Shanks, to me, are over control. Okay, so if we put this continuum on once again, and Yips is over here, we have a lot of over control people that aren't quite to Yips yet. So they want so bad for the ball to go well, they'll hang on for dear life, and they're controlling it, and then that's what causes the shanks. One remedy that I found works quite a bit of the time is to teach people. I'll ask them, could you shank on command? Could you do it for me? Could you show me your shank? And see, the yip and the shank are really stuck in the subconscious there. You don't consciously stand up there to do that. So what we've got to do is, if we can bring it back up into the consciousness and say, okay, here's my shank pattern, and then here's my non-shank pattern. Now they have a choice about which motor program they'd like to use, and it can be very effective. But in my opinion, working with players, shanks are not nearly as debilitating as yips.
Anyone else? We got something back here.
Could you explain exactly, I kind of missed the co-contraction, exactly what that is, and in putting stroke? I mean, is that if the ball kind of not falling through and back and hitting it kind of recoiling?
It won't be the recoil on the end. It will be right before impact. So if this is the ball and the or the hands are coming in to the ball, what happens within 250 milliseconds before impact is you have a co-contraction. Same agonist-antagonist muscles are contracting at the same time, which causes that jerk that a little bit you saw in the film, or the spasm that occurs, and that's a typical marker often for dystonia. So what we want, they should be sequencing instead of occurring at the same time. I'll just tell you, I think we're going to find in this study, I think we finally have figured out one more distinction that's very important. And that is that there's different types of co-contraction. So what we found is we were just looking at the data minimally, there's a spasm or a spike that's a very strong co-contraction, and then other players that have a co-contraction, but it's a longer period of time. And so I think what we're gonna, I don't know this, but we're kind of hoping that if we can identify that spasm, that's gonna be the neurologic nips. Because other people, the co-contraction simply might be them controlling the motion, because we still saw it in 18% of those non-yips people, that they had co-contraction.
Okay, we have one here.
Is there any, have you guys done any research on, I don't know how best to phrase it, if the game that the yips have come on from outside stressors, like say something has changed in their life outside of the game? Has there been any type of research on how that's affected the yips or something like that?
You know what, we have not. The earlier studies, McDaniels and Sakyev, they were interviews, they sent out lots of questionnaires, and so did Ainsley Smith, to help define some of the factors related to yips, the age, the categories, and those types of things. I don't know if they included stressors. I'd have to go back and look. I don't know that. However, those 50% that there was an event that happened, that was usually a very important event for those people. That it was an important putt or it was an important chip, so the importance of that performance was higher, and that's when the yip came out, and we probably had it ever since.
Debbie, I've noticed that some professional golfers will stand over a putt a long period of time. Some will stand over a very short period of time. In your experience, do you think that makes a difference?
Yes, it makes a difference. You can't get it over with quick, and the yips people, often they just want to get out of there as fast as they can, but it doesn't work. You can't just get it over with quick. There's usually a pace and a rhythm that has to take place. And the longer you stand over it, probably the more trouble those people are getting into. Usually, all of that stuff they're doing over the ball, they should have done behind the ball. So this was where the routine comes in to help a lot with yips people, is if they just go through and they keep their pace and they keep going and they know exactly what they're doing with every part of it, okay? And then there's a pace to starting that motion and finishing it. Finishing is critical. Yeah. So standing too long. We studied it, and I went out and tested with the tour. The longest people stand over the ball usually is 4 seconds. After 4 seconds, your pattern in your brain is going to start, your level of activation is going to go down, and you're not going to be able to perform as well. That's just in the old even reaction time studies. So, ironically, that's what we found for the framework for golfers. So if they're standing over there longer than that, they're in trouble. But there are a lot of them that stand 4 seconds. I've seen it. When we did our study, the average time between when you take your last look and come back here and start the motion was 0.9 seconds. 0.9. Yeah, it's just under a second. So that's where that 1 second of data is pretty critical. Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Who do you find tunes into your research more, individuals or coaches? Do you have very many coaches who are looking to this type of information to help their players, or does it tend to be the players who are more motivated? Because it seems to me that there's kind of an industry that's missing this information.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It takes a lot for the individuals to come, I think. And usually somebody sends them, is what I find. So their mechanical coach has given up. They don't know what else to do with them, to help them. And so, they'll take them as far as they can. And then in terms of, you're talking coach, there's the instructor coach that often will start sending them, or there's the team coaches. And I get more and more calls from teams, coaches that, can you help me with my player because they've got yips. At ASU, at the start of the season, the coach told me she thought 3 of the 7 players had yips. And if I could just tell you, we just had our tournament, we finished Sunday. Our #1 player has yips. She came with the yips. She won the tournament. She tied to win. And here's how she did the last day, because she was leading going into the last day, I think by 1 stroke. And for all 4-foot and in putts, she closed her eyes. For 4-foot to 15-foot putts, she listened for the ball to drop, and anything beyond that, she was fine. And that's how she won the tournament. I've had Wendy Ward has had yips for years. I worked with her for years, and she's won on the tour with the yips. You can play. The goal is to keep these people out there. Yeah. Yes.
Would you say this? Sorry. Would you say that the yips generally fall under the umbrella of performance anxiety, or not?
They do, but Most people put them there, but I have a problem with that. Because knowing it's not the cause, it'll just make it worse. If we can reduce the performance anxiety, I mean, once you start doing it, it can cause a lot of anxiety, but if we can reduce the anxiety, we can reduce the impact of the yip, but it's not going to make it go away. They're still going to yip. Yeah.
So Debbie, thank you
Oh,
so much.
Oh, thank you.